Hello everyone. This video is the third presentation in my series on the key philosophical text, the key texts or works in Western philosophy. If you recall, the first presentation was on Plato's Republic, the second was on Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, and as the third text, I have chosen the Discourses of Epictetus. And the translation that I read, which I think is a great translation, was by George Long. I've written a lot of texts. It's longer than the last two presentations, so let me begin quickly. Stoicism is neither a speculative philosophy nor a self-help guide. It is an extreme form of practice and training that rests on a set of presuppositions about nature and human life. More precisely, we can look at it at two levels, the individual level and the collective level. When we look at Stoicism at the level of the individual, how Stoicism is expressed by the individuals, we see a form of training, and a training that both responds to and requires hardship in the individual's life. So more hardship means more opportunities for practice. The more hardship you experience, the more you can train as a Stoic. At the level of the collective, Stoicism appears to be a defense against corruption and decay at the level of culture. If we reify culture and assume that it has some sort of agency, Stoicism is a way in which a culture protects itself against exhaustion, corruption, and decay. It appears as if it is a last line of defense because it is relying on individuals who hold on to their own dignity and a radical form of freedom against all external odds. And these individuals do that by entering into this intense form of life that Epictetus describes and promotes in this work. This extreme training of Stoicism rests on a corresponding set of presuppositions that are equally uncompromising, extreme or uncompromising. These include these presuppositions. So there's a set of ideas, and these ideas are taken to support the form of life, of practices of Stoicism. Now I'm talking about these underlying ideas. The ideas include the distinction between internals and externals. It's a very sharp line drawn between internals and externals. It is said that there are things over which you have absolute control, and these are yours. And there are other things over which you don't have absolute control. These are not yours. The boundary between these two is subject to regular inspection. So we should regularly return to and ask the question, regularly ask yourself, is this within my power or is this beyond my power? For things within your power, and within our power, we exercise control. But we do something else. We don't just exercise control with respect to things that are within our control. We also affirm our affective or emotional attachment to them. The aim is to feel pleasure or pain, pleasure or aversion, only in response to my own exercise of what is within my power. And I practice indifference or not caring. I practice regularly, constantly. I practice indifference to outside events and even outside consequences of my own action. If you pursue what doesn't belong to you, what is beyond your control, if you try to control that, you will necessarily let go of what is yours, what is in your power. And you will lose what is yours. You will lose it. You will lose that last line of defense that we talked about. Control of externals, or the attempt to control external events, doesn't come for free. It comes at the cost of losing the only thing that is ours. People have a rudimentary but inaccurate idea of that boundary between what is ours and what is not ours. For example, Epictetus argues, people are generally ready to confess to being having some features or having some characteristics. For example, people are okay with confessing of being shy. It's very comfortable for people to say, "Oh, I'm shy," or people might confess to being bad at math, but they won't confess of being unjust. They will not confess to injustice or foolishness. In other words, they confess to things that they believe are not chosen by them, but they won't confess to things that are voluntary vices, or at least they think they are voluntary vices. They fail to recognize the voluntary character of acting shyly or remaining unskilled at a domain. That is why it is useful to examine the boundary and have a more responsible attitude towards it. So people don't admit, they won't realize that being shy is also under our control. That's why they are ready to confess to it. The regular inspection and affirmation of affective bond, emotional bond, to one's own will and deliberation, and indifference to externals is a strategy for remaining loyal to one's own role and principles under difficult times. Serving under a powerful politician, so imagine you have a job and you have to serve under somebody who is a powerful politician who is also corrupt. It's possible that the superior will banish us or send us to exile or fire us from our position if we don't say or do what is expected. Epictetus promotes the attitude of telling the superior something like this, that it is my task to say and do what I believe to be true, to be just, and it is your task to banish me, or in our case, more contemporary. It is your task, we can tell the boss, it's my task to do what I believe in, and it is your task to fire me. And it is my task to go away without sorrow. One way of engaging in this practice effectively is to imagine what happens before you enter into a situation. So to keep reinforcing the boundary between what is under our control and what is not under our control. It is helpful to imagine a situation, to think through a situation before we enter into it. For example, before entering into a public sphere. Imagine people being annoying, disrespectful, or loud in a public setting. You imagine these not to prepare for surprises, but to prepare to be indifferent. If you're attached to consequences beyond your control, you fall into despair and let go of your own responsibility. Epictetus applies this to family ties too. So when he talks about how we should feel responsible and what we should do in response to our parents, for example, he asks, are you bound by duty and by fate to a good father, or are you tied to a father? So somebody will come to Epictetus and say, oh, my father is a bad person. I don't want to be responsible to him anymore. Epictetus in that case says, do you have duty to a good father? Is that special case that you have only duty to a parent who has good character? Or do you have duty and are you bound by fate to a father, regardless of what characteristic they have? They say, but my father is unjust to me. He's a bad person. And Epictetus responds, that isn't your business. Your business is to do your own part in the relationship. And this applies to all relationship, all familial ties. Your duty is to be just and good to the father. The sense of duty comes from inner reason, not by considering probable consequences. The sense of duty comes from having reasoned about the matter, not by observing how other people go about things. So it is not just about how, when I look around and see how other people treat their mother or treat their brother, and then I do the same. It has to come from my own reasoning, my own process of reasoning about the matter, and then I come to my own conclusion regardless of, first, what other people do, and second, how I'm going to be responded to, what my father or mother or brother will respond back. Those are not my business. Another example is when we go to war. When we go to war, we should ignore predictions about the outcome of a war. We go to war, or Epictetus says, go to war just for what your act represents. Defending your brothers and your homeland, not because you will probably win. Another example of this is about choosing your profession. Epictetus says people quickly decide to become something based on superficial observation. They wish to become a wrestler one day, next day they decide to become a gladiator, next day they choose to become a philosopher. But what they do is mimicry. They try to copy based on what they see as admirable and desirable on the surface. So they see one day a philosopher who's very charming, very charismatic, or a wrestler or a gladiator who's very brave, and they say, oh, I want to do that. So what they do is like aping or mimicry. It is not based on reason. They don't pursue things in earnest. When you decide to become something, Epictetus says, when you decide to become something, imagine not the best case scenario, but the worst case scenario. Imagine, if you want to be a wrestler, imagine what it would be to be a losing wrestler. Or if you decide to be a philosopher, imagine what it would be like to be a bad philosopher, somebody who's not successful. Then choose it if you wish. So think through the decision and its possible outcomes. There are also psychological insights in the discourses. For example, in one discourse, someone comes to the philosopher and complains about other people feeling bad for him. So he says, Epictetus, other people are feeling sorry for me, but I'm in a good state. They shouldn't feel sorry for me. But in fact, Epictetus points out that that person, he is the one who is not yet convinced that he is in a good state. If he was convinced, he wouldn't be bothered by the opinion of other people. So this is a nice psychoanalytic insight, which is way ahead of its time. The discourses contain many references to Plato's philosophy and to the character of Socrates in particular. So, having read some of the early dialogues, especially, for example, the Apology or Crito, would enrich your reading of the discourses, but it's not strictly speaking necessary. There are other connections with Plato's philosophy. The idea that rationality is the one faculty or skill that can address itself also appears in the dialogues, Plato's dialogues. There's also the idea that other animals can use objects. An animal, non-human animal, can use food, can use shelter, but the animals don't understand the uses of these objects. We humans, on the other hand, can, at least potentially, we can understand use. We don't just use objects, but we can understand our use of objects. It would be shameful for a human person to begin and end their life as an animal, as a non-human animal, rather than taking up its unique place in nature. Our task is to go where nature has intended for human beings to go. There are certain statements that these are certain statements, central statements that repeat throughout the discourses. One of them is a statement about our general task. What is our general task while we are learning Stoic philosophy? Our task is to use appearances appropriately. So our task, according to Epictetus, is the right use of appearances. This idea is something that becomes clear after more reading of the discourses. So the more you read of the discourses, the more you realize what he means by the right use of appearances. Appearances it refers to opinions, among other things. They also include noise, gossip, luck or fortune, reputation, even your own habits and desires. These are appearances, what appears to be the case. Epictetus says that those who follow all appearances inconsiderately, without much thought, and rashly are mad. So a madman is someone who follows appearances. So somebody who always trusts public opinion, the opinion of others, or trusts reputation, or just does whatever is already existing as a habit, or pursues whatever desire they have. Whatever desire they happen to have, they pursue it. That's also a kind of madness. In dealing with other people, we should pay attention to how the faculty of reasoning is used by them. So when you're dealing with someone, you should pay attention to how that other person that you're dealing with is reasoning about things. Some people might be cut off from their faculty of reasoning, and it might be still worth reasoning with them. In some people, however, like some academics or some politicians, the faculty of reasoning isn't just cut off. It is, in Epictetus's words, it is brutalized. So he says some academics or some politicians, they are not just out of touch with their reason, Their reason is brutalized. They have misused their logic, their own faculty of reason so much that it is completely damaged. With these people, it is useless to reason. It is better to not reason with them at all. At the same time, don't be angry at someone who cannot reason or respond to your reasoning. This is like being angry at a blind person for not being able to see. What is the essence of reasoning? To note what follows from what we have already accepted. That is, in short, the essence of reasoning. To accept something and then follow through. If we accept a proposition, what else should we accept? In general, we reason in order that we aren't improperly employed. If we don't reason properly, if we don't use our reason, we end up being used improperly. Our person ends up being used improperly. But if we reason about things that we are dealing with, we will not be improperly employed. Thinking about the essence of reasoning clarifies the Stoic project of using appearances properly, employing sound premises, and letting go of unsound premises. In a difficult situation, you could either engage in fault finding. You can either, if you find yourself in a difficult situation, you can either pause and say, okay, whose fault is this? It's that person's fault. It's my boss's fault. It's my brother's fault. That's if you do that, you're operating based on one set of premises. Or alternatively, you could use your gift and rise to the occasion. You can use your abilities to deal with a difficult situation. Your task, according to one set of premises, is to use your gifts to fulfill your God-given duty, or the duty that is assigned to you by destiny. The task is to understand your freedom. That's the general task, is to understand your freedom rather than to find out whose fault it is. Who is a philosopher? You can see when you read the discourses, you can see that Epictetus has mixed feelings about this title, a philosopher. He's not really attached. He wouldn't demand you to call him a philosopher. But if you push him, if you press him to define who the philosopher is, he will say, a philosopher is someone in whom freedom is embodied. Or in his words, he would say, a philosopher is an asserter of freedom, somebody who's expressing human freedom. In Book 4, Chapter 1, we read, this road, meaning the Stoic education, this road leads to freedom. That is the only way of escaping from slavery to other people and to our own desire. Epictetus' discussion of habit and choice, the latter reinforcing the former, but the choices that we make reinforce our habits. They either make our habits stronger or weaker. So his discussion of habits and choice is consistent with Aristotle's discussion, so I won't repeat them here. Just to note that his treatment is more dramatic and compelling. So he makes the subject of habit and choice much more dramatic. Aristotle is more calculative and logical. So about repeatedly giving into temptation, Epictetus says, if you have once been defeated by temptation, so if you have a desire, if you want to, for example, go on a diet, but you give in to the desire and have a bucket of ice cream. If you have been defeated once by your desire and say to yourself that you will conquer next time, then next time say the same thing again. If you do that, be assured that you at last will be in so wretched a condition and so weak that you will not even know afterward that you are doing wrong, but you will even begin to make apologies for your wrongdoing. And then you will confirm the saying of Hesiod to be true. Hesiod said, with constant ills the dilatory strives. Another path into Stoicism of Epictetus can begin with the injunction, know what you are, know thyself. But knowing who you are should be followed by action. First, know who you are, and then try to become excellent according to that which is you. So knowing who you are gives you some standards. If you know you are a human being, then you have to be excellent according to the standards of a good human being, not the standards of a donkey. Be true to who you are. Be beautiful according to the standards of what you are. How does a person become more beautiful? By wearing more jewelries and designer clothes? No. By strengthening the will, the faculty of reasoning. By removing bad opinions. That's how, according to Epictetus, a human becomes better and more beautiful. There are a lot of things that make the discourses an enjoyable read. Part of the literary charm of the discourses is their conversational style. Sometimes a descriptive sentence turns into a question halfway through the sentence. So for example, instead of reading, someone comes to Epictetus and says, my friend is planning against me. So instead of reading that and then challenging it, we read, Epictetus says, someone is planning something against what? Against your will? So see, the sentence was in the middle interrupted and was interrupted with a question. Someone is planning something against what? Against your will? In another place, he says, you have been training in philosophy for what? So this is not just to save space, to have fewer sentences. It is showing that you can interrupt a description with a question. Halfway, in the middle of a sentence, you can interrupt yourself by learning from Epictetus. Let's read a passage about this. This is from Book 3, Chapter 19. The first difference between a common person and a philosopher is this. The common person says, woe to me for my little child. Woe to me means, oh, feel sorry for me. So back to the quote. Woe to me for my child. Oh, feel sorry for me, my child is bothering me. For my brother, for my father. So that's what the common person says. The philosopher, if he shall ever be compelled to say, woe to me, stops and says, for myself, because he is thinking in the wrong way. For nothing which is independent of the will can hinder or damage the will, and the will can only hinder or damage itself. Epictetus encourages us to go to philosophy in a way a sick man goes to surgery. A sick man goes to surgery because of ill health and then comes out of surgery with pain, not with pleasure. He talks about his teacher, Epictetus talks about his teacher Rufus, who used to talk to his students as if they were brought in front of him on the basis of an accusation. So Rufus was very harsh with his students, as if the students were accused by someone, and he was treating them like a judge. Epictetus goes on to say, after a philosophical lecture, after a philosophical discourse, you should not say, oh, that philosopher talked very well about the subject. That shouldn't be what we say. Instead, we should say, he hit me well. Hit me with his words, not with his hands. He hit me well. Now I know I should no longer act as I did. Training, according to Epictetus, requires perpetually renewing the spirit of combat, the spirit of struggle, the spirit of challenge. When you fail, what does it mean to fail? We fail when we fail to maintain the proper conduct of our will, to use our reasoning properly. When we fail, we should rest and prepare again. But we shouldn't take too long to prepare. This isn't the Olympics. This is not the Olympics where you wait for 4 years before the next challenge. This is a perpetual game, and it happens next instance in your life. And the aim is to gain your freedom and to gain your peace and tranquility. Similarly, if you experience a victory, don't forget that you're going back and you will continue the combat. These were my notes on the Discourses of Epictetus. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, feel free to share with me. Otherwise, thank you for your attention, and I will speak with you in the next video.